My name is Brody. I wanted to be a father for pretty much my whole life. It's not something that little kids often think about. I don't think of these little boys. But I always wanted to be a father, and I wanted 4 boys. That's what I wanted. That was the plan. I remember when I was 10 years old, playing Lego Star Wars with all my little action figures. I had 5 Jedi. One was me, and the other 4 were my 4 boys. And we would go around the galaxy and do all sorts of adventures together. Probably 10 years old, 11 years old. Fast forward 15 years, I don't have 4 boys. I have 2 beautiful foster daughters. The plans that we have differ from God's plan. God's plan is far more beautiful. Getting into foster care wasn't something that I ever really thought about until I met my wife. She was involved in a group home for about 10 years. And one of the things that she said, I was 19, we were dating, and she said, I want to take care of this. I won't name names just because the camera's on. But she says, I want to take care of our oldest. And she says, if you're not on board with that, there's the door. You can leave. And I thought about it for a second, and I thought, well, I don't know anything about taking care of, a disabled adult. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have any experience with that. But I thought, that's a good thing. And my wife's qualified, and I can learn. And if God's calling us in that direction, who am I to say no? So I said, all right, well, I'm on board with that. I don't know what that's going to look like. And it was pretty scary, especially when we were doing all the paperwork. And, we had a good long time because, our government isn't the most efficient, so paperwork took a long time. But, you're nervous as she's coming in. It's like, and we got to know her a little bit. We would take her out to my parents, and we'd get to see her once a week. And I get to learn her, learn who she was as time went on. And, she spoke differently, and the vocabulary wasn't all there. And it took a little time to learn her language and who she was. But we got there. And it took time. And now it's become one of the most beautiful parts of my life. And you get to do things that you don't normally think that you would do, like reading books at night, and how wonderful that is. And sometimes you read a book about Barbie wanting to become a ballerina, and you're thinking, oh, who wrote this? This is or sometimes you read about a giraffe and who really wants to dance, and it's a beautiful book, and it's really good, but it becomes your foster daughter's favorite book. So you memorize it, and you don't even need to read it at night because you know all the words. And sometimes you find that she comes home with a book, I don't know where she got it, but it must have been from the 50s and 60s. And you think, oh my goodness, you think our slang is weird. There's a kid in the book, his name was Hands because he had big hands. But you get those special moments where you get to read at night. Or the special moments when you're on vacation and you're swimming in a swimming pool and your foster daughter climbs on your back, and nothing makes her more happy than you just carrying her around in the pool. And those special moments are so good. And then you get the hard moments. The moments where you don't quite understand what's going on because there's no manual for this particular person. And she has her own life and her own challenges, and you don't necessarily know what's going on. You might have an inclination of thinking, maybe if I do this, that might work. But it's a lot of trial and error. And sometimes it's really frustrating when you're sitting there and you're thinking, man, I'm a failure. And then you have a wonderful wife who says you're not a failure. It's just a difficult thing. And one thing for me, that I've really grown to understand is the Father's love for me as I've gone through this, because I stood there thinking, I'm like, man, if you would just listen to me, if you would just heed my words, and like everything would be okay. And then I think about God looking at me and all the mistakes that I keep on making, and God saying to me, if you just listen to me, everything will be okay. And you learn more about the Father's relationship as you grow as a father, and it's a really beautiful thing. But it's not a thing that makes you prideful, because unlike the Father, I don't know everything, and there's a lot of things that I have to learn. So it's a very humbling experience. And now we've been blessed with a second foster daughter. And there's a new array of challenges, but also a new array of just beautiful moments. And sitting and reading in the hotel room when we went on our trip, and she had a comic book, and she wanted to read the white speech bubbles, and I read the green little thought bubbles, and we just sit there and we read this book that she has, and it's such a beautiful thing. Sometimes you get funny moments, like our foster daughter. We have to kind of watch what she eats. She doesn't always have full capacity. So there's food in front of her, she's going to eat it. So there was one time we went on our trip, and she wanted to nap, so we had her in the separate room napping in our room, and I went to check on her once, and she's sleeping. Check on her again, and she's still sleeping with it. I check on her the third time, and she took all the muffins from the little snack thing. All the muffin wrappers, Little Debbie's muffin wrappers, it was like 1,100 calories. She looked at me and she said, "I'm hungry." And I'm like, "I bet you were." We have moments like that, and we went and we walked together, and we burned off those calories together, and we worked with her, and you have kind of funny moments like that too. And even in those tough times, God can really bless us. But it has been a challenge, and I had a really good father growing up. Still my father. But I remember when he was talking about fatherhood, one of the things that he would say to me, he'd get real close and look at me, and he said, "Listen, Brody," he said, your great-grandfather used to beat his wife, and he would beat his kids. Right? That was what he did as a father. He wasn't a good man. And he said, his son used to just beat his wife. He wouldn't beat his kids, but he'd still beat his wife. And that was your grandfather's father. But he was trying to do better, and be a better father. So he wouldn't hit his kids, right? And your grandfather, my father, he wouldn't hit his wife at all. He wouldn't hit his kids, but he didn't always provide for us emotionally. He thought fatherhood was just about, providing a meal for your kids and making sure they had everything they needed financially. He said, and that was all that he could do because of the father he came from. And he said, "I'm not a perfect father, but I'm trying to be better than my father and better than his father before him." And he said, "I want you to be a better father than I am to you." And that's been my goal. And I think that's the mark of a good father, is that when we want a better life for our kids. And I think the best life that we can give to our kids is showing them the gospel and showing them how Jesus loves them by loving them in the same way. Thank you.